Greetings, one and all, as we once again welcome you to the Spirit Radio. I cannot begin to tell you how wonderful it is to be here again. Though we have been absent, rest assured it was only a passing moment of silence. Once again, refreshed and rejuvenated, your gallant host is here, as is the ever-so-charming producer. Here we sit, in the dark, surrounded by mysterious tones and tales lurking in the darkness, and what could be reaching out of the shadows to grasp at the sides of your head and whisper into your ears. We are here, and you will listen. Now we are ready and willing to listen to every single one of your dark and depraved and dire situations and stories that you have found yourself skipping and tripping through that leads you here to this point right here and right now. We wouldn't be here without you. We couldn't be here without you. You have only yourselves to thank for allowing us to get this far. We have persevered and persecuted, and we are here once again, so please turn up that dial and listen to the voices in the dark.
All of those voices, yours, mine, our eager callers.
And of course those hushed whispers in the dark of your rooms or lingering near your ears, chilling enough, but I imagine quite nightmarish when you're all alone. But you are not alone, dear listeners, not while we're here. Pick up, dial, tell us all your frights and flights of the nights.
So many calls, so little time. I wonder who's going to be first on the line.
My goodness, to hear you posing questions. You must be in good spirits, dear producer. But spirits are our livelihood, and ripe for this darkest of hours. Hello, Cora. You're on the air.
This isn't my story. This is a story that I'm only a bit player of. It was actually my daughter's story, but the effects were felt through my entire family. I hadn't been planning to become a parent for a lot of years. I was actually studying at university to become a doctor. But due to an event that I don't really want to get into, let's just say it involves someone having an awful lot to drink, me saying no, and me finding out not too long later that I was pregnant. He couldn't admit that he was the father, and he also didn't want to be a part of the child's life, because to admit that he was the child's father would mean that he had done exactly what I'm accusing him of. It rattled me, the whole event. I wasn't as strong as I am now. I tried to stay at the university, but with the impending birth of my first child, it didn't feel right. My father and my mother understood, and although they tried to urge me to continue, I knew I had to come home. Unfortunately, home, my childhood home, had been sold. My father had plenty of money. It was how he was able to get me to university without any debt. I know, spoilt little rich girl. But they'd moved into a smaller place. As a result, with a little grandchild eventually running around, and me living back home, there was no way that we could all cram into their current accommodations. So Dad put the house on the market, and while I went through the months with my mother by my side and my father's support, he was looking and looking until we were finally able to get our own new place. The three of us, eventually four, moved into a rather nice, large bungalow. It had been refurbished from one that had been built in the 1950s. The attic had been converted into a master bedroom. It was so large and spacious, I swear it looked like a set from an old TV show. You'd almost imagine Samantha Morgan or Dick Van Dyke walking in through the front door. Anyways, we had prepared the house for the new arrival, and when she arrived, all of my doubts and worries seemed to have melted away. Maybe that sounds a little corny, but it sort of is the way most mothers are. All those doubts, worries, but the second you hold that little life in your arms, they just melt away. Time went by, and my little girl, whose name I'd like to keep to myself for now, she gave my life new meaning. From what I learned from my studies as a doctor, I plan to eventually maybe transfer into becoming a pediatrician, a child doctor. I took on a smaller job working at a local pharmacy. I'd done some pharmacy training in my late teens before university, and it was a good way of keeping some money coming in just so I could provide for my daughter without having to continuously live off of my father's money. I wanted it to be a life I could provide for her, and he understood, but still kept a roof over our heads. But now you're probably wondering, why is this all relevant? It's to show that we had been living in that house for a long time. It wasn't like a typical event where the second you step in the door, creepy stuff starts happening. My daughter was walking and talking and learning before things started to get weird. One day, my daughter was playing in the front room with her dolls. She had a doll that looked like her grandmother and one that looked like one of the neighbors down the street, and she used to pretend that they were meeting up for tea parties. I thought it was kind of cute. She never went upstairs, because that wasn't her room. She always stayed downstairs. My room and hers were both on the ground floor, just opposite the kitchen, and my parents slept upstairs. As I turned away from my daughter, I was tidying up something from the kitchen table. It was like a large dining room table that I was cleaning up some of the silverware from around the house. And as I was cleaning it, I liked to keep an eye on my daughter. I turned away for a few minutes, still stood there, and I could see her out of the corner of my eye. And when I looked back, she was sat looking up at the dolls on the back of the chair where her grandfather sat, and she giggled. But it was an odd little giggle. It was a giggle of when a friend or family comes around, or a neighbor. It wasn't a real giggle. It was a kind of giggle like, I know this is supposed to be funny and I'm going to laugh, but it's not very funny. It's not a real laugh. I smiled to her. "Did you put them up there, sweetheart?" I said. "You should be careful when you're climbing." Mum, my friend did." "Oh, we're at the stage of imaginary friends. I get it now. What's your imaginary friend's name?" I asked her. She sat and bit at her fingertip as though thinking. Was she thinking of the name? And then she said, "They don't have one." Cute, I thought. An imaginary friend that she couldn't think the name of. Okay, no problem. "Okay, does your imaginary friend want to bring those toys down?" I said that, and lo and behold, one of the dolls slipped and fell forward. The doll that was of my mother. I was a little surprised, but these things had a sort of a beanbag filling. I guessed it had just shifted around and fallen. At the time, that's what I thought anyway. I didn't think more of this event, and my daughter kept having her imaginary little friend walking around the house. It was strange. She kept asking and talking and sometimes asked things that really surprised me, but explained that it was for her imaginary friend. "What's it like to go to school? What's it like to bake? What's it like when you go to sleep? How long do you have to sleep for? What's your favorite color? My favorite color?" All these things she was asking me. These were such strange little questions, and then eventually she asked, "Can I have her as a sister?" Now, I obviously wasn't going to start planning having any more brothers or sisters for her, so I just smiled and said, "Of course you can." I knew eventually that when she went off to kindergarten, a little bit older, she'd grow out of having an imaginary friend, but because there wasn't really much for her to do, and it really was a suburban neighborhood, a lot of polite dinner parties, and I think the youngest kid closest to her age was at least 7 or 8, so she was always being carried by me, and or we just stayed at home. So I think it was just her way of keeping some company. That or watching TV with me. DVDs are a wonderful thing. It means you're going to always know what your kid's going to be watching, even if you want to put on some noise in the background. As you probably guessed from earlier, I love old kinds of TV shows, the old sitcoms and everything. I knew that my daughter would be able to watch them in the background, so I said, "Sure, you can have a sister." I even bought her own little toys. And even when I shouted at her for something, I said, "Okay, you two." My daughter loved it. She loved that I was accepting this member of our family. One night, as I settled myself down to sleep, my daughter was in the opposite side of the room. My daughter went to the bathroom, and I kept one eye open as I watched her go. She was potty trained quite early, so I wasn't too worried, and we have a little seat and everything set on the downstairs toilet for her. The door opened, and as she came back in and I saw her petite little figure wander back in and disappear under the covers, I heard this strange creak as she crept into bed, and there was a scent. I know it's not pleasant to say, but it wasn't the kind of bathroom scent. It was almost like a burning smell. I got a little bit worried. I got up, leaving my daughter underneath the covers, and wandered down towards the bathroom just to double check. When I got to the bathroom, that's when my blood ran cold. The door was ever so slightly open because my little girl doesn't shut the door in case anything happens or she needs my help, so I can keep an ear open for her. And she was sat on the toilet. A little startled, I went back to the room, back into bed, pulled back the blankets, and there was nothing. A brief smell of that scent again, and nothing. I was a little scared, but I figured I had just been a little bit tired, and I sort of expected that when I saw my daughter come back in that I had imagined it. Well, my daughter comes back, definitely her this time. I gave her a kiss and tucked her back into bed. For several weeks, nothing more happens. Then I started to notice that my daughter's looking a little bit more tired than usual. She looks a bit nervous. Where she used to constantly play with her sister, this imaginary friend of hers, now it's like she didn't want to play at all. I would try to encourage her to play, but then she would say, "I really don't want to play, Mummy." I was worried why such a vibrant little child had become quiet and withdrawn. So I took her out in the car to go for a drive to get some ice cream. I took my old car that I had. It was a simple little pickup that I bought because it was cute. It was a little run down and ramshackled, but it had two little seats, and I felt better than driving around in a posh, swanky car that would probably fault like an accordion the second that it got hit. I wanted something that was built like a tank for my daughter to be safe in. As we were driving along, my daughter seemed to have returned to her former self. "Thank you, Mummy," she said politely. "For what, sweetie? What's up?" "My sister's being mean." Imaginary friends being mean? Okay, that's a new one. What's she being mean with then, sweetheart? "She's trying to scare me a little bit." "What's scaring you?" "She keeps telling me that she is the better sister and that she's going to prove it. She said that she's going to take care of me, not you." This was starting to confuse me. "Look, sweetheart, I'm your mum, okay? I'm always going to take care of you. That's a promise. Listen to me. I promise you that I'm always going to take care of you. You're my baby girl, and I love you." "I love you too, Mummy, but I don't think my sister loves me that much." "Do you want me to tell her off when we get back?" And she nodded softly. I was partially pretending just to make my child relax a bit, but there was something on her face that she shouldn't have had at that age. When I was a child, I believed that my father and my mother could do anything, all the way until I was 8 or 9 years old. But then, obviously, as you grow up, you realize that they're not supermen and they don't have all of the answers and they're not always there for you. I mean, she wasn't even 4 yet, and I could see on her face that she didn't believe that I could help her. It felt so weird, and it kept me up that night trying to think and read up on what might be going on. Vitamin deficiency? Being cooped up in the house too much? Isolation? It could have been all these things, but my father and mother were always there when I wasn't. and we always made sure that she had a presence in the house. When we went back to the house, I stepped through the door and, in a very calm tone, to the room, I said that she needed to be a good sister and she needed to behave. She couldn't make her sister feel like this, it would make her sad. And I didn't feel like I was alone in the room with my daughter at that moment. It felt like something was stood right behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, as I walked across the room towards the sofa, I saw something in the mirror. A dark, skinned figure. No, a charred, skinned figure. I spun around, desperate to see this creature, to see whatever it was, but all I could see was my daughter crouching back, not daring to come into the room. There was a thud upstairs. I ran. I picked up my daughter and we went upstairs, and into my father and mother's bedroom were my daughter's dolls, sitting there in a circle looking politely at each other as though it was a little party. My mother never put them up there, and the toy chest where we kept all of her dolls was locked up safe and sound. No one had undone that lock. I was starting to get a little bit freaked out, so I told my daughter, "You're not allowed to play with your sister anymore. She's not your sister. You're my only daughter." She said, "Mummy, I tell her this when she starts getting nasty. She's only my sister because I asked her to be. And she keeps saying no because now that I've said that, there's no takebacks. There's no takebacks, Mummy." I asked for a few weeks off at work. I said that I was having some problems with my daughter, and the guy who ran the place was quite understanding, as he had just had his third daughter and she was going through a similar event. We even said that we should arrange a play date, thinking it was a pretty good idea and thinking it was a good idea for my daughter to socialize with someone else. I asked if they could come round whilst I was doing some cleaning again. Some cleaning, some food and drink, have a nice little play date, no problem. At one point, the two girls went towards the kitchen. I had taken one of the mirrors off of the wall and lowered it down to put it by my feet so I could clean the top of the frame. As it sat leaning on the wall, I saw my daughter's feet, her little friend's feet, and I saw two burnt feet walk past and stop behind me. I spun around in fright and there was no one there. I was horrified at this point. What was my daughter seeing? What was she experiencing? What was going on? I spoke to a local priest and he suggested that if something was happening, to maybe look into the history of the house. I wanted to, believe me, I wanted it to be just like the horror movies. Research the house, go have a seance done, exorcism, all that kind of stuff. We never got the chance. My daughter was sleeping less and less, and I was worried. I dozed off on the couch, reading up on all the things I thought it could be. Ghost, hallucinations. I even called up to get the CO2 checked to see if there was any carbon monoxide in the air. Maybe that was why we were hallucinating or something. And then I saw my daughter being dragged, and I mean dragged, by her shoulders along the floor, heading straight towards the wall. It took my mind a second to process what I'm seeing. I dived forward and I grabbed her and she was screaming at the top of her lungs, and I think if I hadn't have stopped her, she would have gone as quickly as she was going straight into the wall. And I wouldn't know what would have happened to her. Broken her neck, fractured her skull, worse. I grabbed her and I pinned her down. And I looked at her face. There were marks, like claw marks, all along her dressing gown. She was in tears and she was so scared that she couldn't even say anything. Then, right next to my ear, I heard the most ugly, warped, cracked, blistered voice muttering the words, "I'm the better daughter." My blood ran cold and I started to turn my head towards the house. And suddenly my daughter screamed, I'm her daughter, not you, you're just nasty. Go away. I don't believe in you anymore. Go away." I don't know where she chose those words. I don't know why. By the time I finished turning my head, I saw the briefest shadow of something disappearing from sight. and then nothing but silence. For the next week, my daughter and I stayed in a motel. Most of that money saving to get my education again just didn't seem worth anything compared to making sure she was okay and that she was safe. I told my father and my mother about what had happened, and they couldn't think of any reason. In all that time we had been there, nothing had triggered it. Maybe it was something my daughter did? I always think she's completely innocent, and I want to believe that she's completely innocent, but I don't know if something's happened that I haven't seen. I just didn't know. And still to this day, I just don't know. But once in a while, if my daughter's having a bad time at school or when she's hanging around with her friends, sometimes in the glass, not behind the glass, but in the glass itself, I still see that shadowy figure. And completely blank, dead eyes glaring straight at her, waiting for the chance to be the big sister again.
An imaginary friend is all fine and dandy. Sometimes you see the cutest little pictures of the strangest of creatures, all crafted by your child's imagination. But after all, it might not be their imagination. They might be seeing exactly what they are drawing, so when you next tell your sweet child that people don't look like that, you might want to question if what they are seeing is really people. Thank you so much, our dear caller. Now, onward, onward, forever into the night. We have many calls to... Ah! Is this our favourite?
It is indeed. And it sounds like someone's been playing tricks on our poor returning guest.
Oh dear me, I hope it hasn't been things too stressful for his poor little heart to take. Hello, old friend, and how are you tonight?
Yeah. You're starting to get pretty good at knowing when I'm gonna call.
Well, of course, we can practically set our watch by you.
You can't, okay? You can't, because I don't know when I'm gonna call. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. But you clearly do.
But do I? Do any of us? Clearly you don't.
Alright. I'll play a little game. I've got a story for you.
Oh, stories. I love stories. Go on. Ah, it's so nice to say this, but the microphone is yours, our dear heckler.
You smug son of a... As I was at work, I had to take some documents down to the file room. We had a big number of clients coming through, and I had an awful lot of paperwork that needed to be organized in order to be destroyed.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, well, I go down to the storeroom, and I see someone walking away from the very room that I was about to go into. It was the woman that I saw in the street a few months ago.
Oh, the one that you thought looked just like one of our listeners.
Yeah, her. I don't know what your game is. I don't know what's going on. But as I got around that corner, she was gone. Let me just... Can I just explain that to you? That corner. I went to that corner immediately. Damn near sprinted. Almost broke my freaking neck trying to get around that corner to make sure I'd catch her and ask her what the hell she was doing there and how the hell you know all those things that you do. I thought maybe it was one of your people you put up to it. That corridor is 20 feet long. There's no doors going left or right, and the door at the end is the fire escape. She had no reason to go down that corridor, and there was nobody there. She vanished in the thin air in the middle of a lit room. I went into the room to see what had happened. I thought maybe she was messing around with the files. Maybe that's how the heck you guys know who I am. And I opened the door and there's printer ink all over the floor, spilling out my goddamn name, my full name, middle, and everything.
Ooh, spooky.
No. I got sent home from work because of that, right? They couldn't say it was me. I didn't have any ink on my goddamn hands. The security footage showed me, not her. They thought it was best to send me home early. I'm stuck at home now, and I've been racking my brain around trying to figure out how the heck your guys did that. Okay, you want me to say you've won? Is that what it takes? When is it gonna get through your heads that it's over?
You really need to calm down. You sound like a man living on the edge, about to have a breakdown. You just pour yourself one of those nice big glasses of brandy that
No. Not again. No. How do you know I've been drinking?
Well, I can tell from your voice.
No. Beer. Whiskey. I could have been drinking anything. You said. Brandy.
Oh. And a particularly nice malt from Scotland, is it? Would that be from your trip away on business? You know, that nice little vacation where you were able to have that interesting little affair with that second...
No! Stop it! 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 Stop it!
Clearly, it seems as though some people have been paying attention to the wrong kind of spirits, if you get my meaning.
I've never been a fan of brandy myself. I enjoy mead. Quite a subtle drink.
He's consumed that many spirits at this point, one could mistake him for a Ouija board. Sorry. Odd humor at this time of night. But this isn't about jokes, after all. It's about you, all of you, out there listening. The caller we just had, hopefully we will see him again, and hopefully he'll be in a far more sober mood. Drinking can do terrible things to the mind after all, but now it's time for the next caller, one whose story seems perfect for the chilly weather we've been having. Something a little bit more heated. Am I correct, caller?
I just split with my partner of 4 years. We've been sweethearts in high school. We ended up going to the same college, so we sort of took it as a sign of fate. So we got married. No sooner had we finished our qualifications. We were in the registry office signing the people's papers to say that we were Mr. and Mrs. Well, unfortunately, his parents didn't like me much at all. I also didn't like them much. My parents weren't exactly happy to hear about it either. They were so happy to be together. I even bought stupid things like a toaster and culinary oven, keeping it all wrapped up, safe and sound, ready for when we got our own place. Oh, we got our own place, and a whole bunch of problems that came with it. He was considering that maybe we should sit down and look at starting a family. I said that I wasn't really ready for that. I wanted to work a little further in my career. I was coming to the end of a job agreement that I'd been in. I was trying to find similar work in a different area and company. Well, whenever there was an argument, we'd just sort it out then and there. Then we'd always just go to sleep with a kiss and a hug, as well as air all our grievances before bedtime. But then the parents started to get involved. His friends would go round for drinks, talk about the argument, and slowly old wounds would reopen. I used to get furious with this, till eventually I resented him going to see his family, which resulted in a whole bunch of new arguments. Every time we had an argument, he'd always leave the door wide open so that he could return. I'd just stop him from apologizing then and there. Sometimes we'd go to sleep, and we still wouldn't have made up. To make matters worse, and in my mind, my rage-filled mind, I thought that this was clear proof that they wanted to get back with him. So they were trying to poison our relationship so that they'd have a chance. More words were shared. More poison spewed, till finally, well, the marriage was over. I walked away, and we decided that it was time for a divorce. Sorry, I just get a little emotional talking about this. After we separated, he went back to his parents. No problem, the door was open, and of course, he could go home. I'll never forget that dark stare that I got from his father. It wasn't even gloating. If he had a big shit-eating grin, I'd have been so happy. But nope, just this cold stare. I wasn't as lucky, unfortunately. See, I had a sister, and shortly after I'd gotten married, she decided to say that she wanted to have her boyfriend move in. Well, of course my parents thought that I'd given up on them, which I never did! I guess they thought it was easier to think that I'd given up on them. So my room was now their room, and my sister's old room was now a storage room, containing stuff from my mother. She was going through chemotherapy at the time, and she sometimes uses the little space that had been cleared out in that room to just relax and take some time away from everyone. I stayed on the couch for a few weeks till I could find somewhere to stay. Unfortunately, I was struggling with options. See, within 2 or 3 months, I knew that my contract was going to be up with the job I was currently at. And with all the stress, I was struggling to find work. It was the middle of spring, unfortunately, and although it was slightly chilly, people weren't exactly running out for summer sales, or even Christmas sales, which is when they usually seem to be hiring. Just some quick work for me to be able to keep myself employed. Well, eventually with the pressures from home to leave, I ended up moving to an old-fashioned apartment complex, just on the outskirts of town. I say apartment complex, though at some point it had been some sort of townhouse from the 1920s or 30s. It was one of those old kinds with a boiler in the basement and a man on hand that always had to keep it maintained. I used to know the guy well. His name was Stephen. He was a nice old man. He used to always talk about the model boats that he would build. He was very much into model making. He'd always joke with me that he never really had the time to go out and look at the real thing. He had no interest in them. He didn't care about where they were built or what year. He just liked how they looked, and he liked replicating them. I always thought that if I had a grandfather who'd been alive from Mead, I wouldn't have minded if it had been Stephen. Stephen was easier to talk to. He was polite. He was kind, and so I found myself opening up and telling him about all my problems. He nodded quietly, listening respectfully to everything that I told him, till eventually he came up with an interesting offer. "Look," he said, "I don't know about this job you're wanting to get, but if you want, as I'm the caretaker here, I can put you on the book so that you can help me out. I'd appreciate it at my age. But if you help me out, I'll try and get a little bit taken off your rent for you. I mean, I may not give you any cash, but if I tell the landlord that you've been helping me, well, that'd get taken into consideration, if you get what I mean." He gave this very little wink, and I got what he was saying. Stephen was old, and that place didn't have a proper elevator, just a long flight of stairs going up and down. So he was obviously starting to think about the future, and when he'd get too old to continue with this type of work. If I was there to help him, a fine, healthy, energetic person, then why not? It might only be for a year or two at most, but I'd hopefully be able to find a new job, no problem. I took the deal, which was a bit unorthodox, but it was too good to pass up. And no, unfortunately, Steve is not going to turn around and be the cause of this story. He generally was a nice man, and when he finally passed just a few weeks ago, it brought the story back to the forefront of my mind. One of the things I had to do was go and grab the rubbish from outside everyone's apartment. There'd be different things for different places, and if there's any junk that they needed help with moving, such as mattresses, furniture, stuff like that, I was basically the gopher for, go do this and go do that. If any repairs needed to be done, I'd go with Stephen, or Stephen would teach me what to do. He just sort of knew the building. It was like he knew every way that it breathed, or which pipes needed what kind of care and attention. The pipes up in room number 217, for example, needed to be clad every winter and treated with care, whereas the ones in number 117, down on the first floor, you could hit them with a hammer till you could hear it ringing in your ears. And then finally, they start to let some warm water through. Well, one of the tenants was a young man who always wore this grimy, oily leather jacket that always used to smell like cigarettes. Never any specific brand. It was any cigarettes he could get his hands on. He would reek of them. Even had stains on the sides of his fingers, all nicotine scarred. That horrible yellow that really starts to sink in and look unpleasant. Well, I'd grown a little bit curious about this guy. Every time Stephen would walk past, he would be there. Stephen would address him as politely as possible. "Good morning, sir." "Hello there, sir." He never addressed Stephen, but he always addressed me. If I said hello or good morning, there would be a moment where he would stop and look at me, or just stall on his walking and stare at me, with his head tilted slightly with intrigue. Almost. Then he would continue. He would always say whatever I had said to him. If I said hello, he would say hello. If I said good morning, he would say good morning. But he would always sort of parrot the way I said it. I tried different languages. I would say salute. hola or Ohio once or twice, and he would just copy me with that same strange, incredulous look as if I had just asked him what year it was. Then he would just go on his way. I noticed once or twice that he had tattoos near his wrist. I couldn't see what, because his jacket always covered them, but it looked like something jagged. I didn't think much of it, because I always had more work to do with that old building. One of the things I had to do was take care of the furnace. The furnace is a big old machine, which I think has been around since the 30s, 40s, or 50s. It's one of the reasons why the rent was so cheap where I was staying, and one of the other reasons why Stephen was needed. See, in the off-season, you wouldn't need that much heat for the building, so Stephen would allow it to just sit on tick over, just generally putting on a few scoops of coal, or whatever fuel we were using at the time. Other times, during the winter, that thing would be blazing like an inferno. If someone wanted hot water, even on a summer's day, Stephen had to go down and adjust the pressures. Do all that wonderful wizardry that kind of made him look like he was taming a dragon. He practically was with the amount of fire that thing belched out. Well, I started to do that job. Stephen didn't mind doing it, but he did say that this was the one job that he couldn't tell anyone that I did. Because if he did, well, there'd be problems. Anyway, Stephen was a little bit ill and couldn't go down to the furnace as much. The weather was getting chilly. It had been raining for about a week or so. So many of the residents had asked that there was more coal put on so that the temperature could be risen slightly. One day, just as I was coming through the front door, I saw Mr. Leatherjacket climbing up the stairs, looking at me with slight confusion on his face. As much as was on mine, admittedly. What are you doing? I asked him. He looked at me, fixed me with a very cold-looking stare. I just had some bills that I needed to burn. Just some junk mail, you know. He chuckled amusingly. Real junk mail. Have you been mistold times, shares kind of stuff? I never liked checking that stuff in the mail. It has my name on it, after all. Besides, Stephen sometimes lets me go down to chuck stuff down there. Why? Is something up? Are you going down there? I looked at him, and I kind of knew what the situation was here. I wasn't supposed to go down there. He wasn't supposed to go down there. Stephen was the only one who had anything to lose if either of us told on the other. So begrudgingly, I just went, "Not at all," and I didn't see you. He chuckled and quietly said, "Who said that?" Must have been talking to a ghost. I had to give it to him. He did have a sense of humor. If a really odd one, and he walked back upstairs. A few times, I would walk past Mr. Leatherjacket. I would see that, look on his face. That knowing smile. He seemed to almost become more confident now, as if he had a confidant that knew of his little secret. Well, I didn't like it. It made me feel uncomfortable. But I couldn't exactly turn around and tell Stephen. Not straight away, anyway. And if it was only for a few bills, what was the harm? Sure enough, I'd see him walk past with other wads of paper in his hands. And then when he'd come back up, he wasn't holding them anymore. Looking back on it now, I guess these were test runs. One day I saw him ducking into the basement carrying a box. Was he going down there for a reason? Was that where he thought he could get rid of more rubbish? Only this time he came back up, carrying it. Just a plain box. He was swinging it down by his arm, humming quietly. There was nothing in it that would make me deem this as suspicious. Well, I didn't think anything of it, until that night. It was the night that everything went wrong. I'd come back late. It was coming up to the last week of me being able to work at the establishment that I was staying. I was really trying to find a new place to live. Mr. Leatherjacket was only one of the things that had motivated me to look faster. But this creep wasn't the main focus of my entire life at this point. Think about it. When you're in high school, you walk past hundreds, if not thousands of people every week on a regular basis. Some might not like the look of you. You might not like the look of them. But you just move past because it's just hundreds and hundreds of people. What does it matter if one or two people stick out to you as people you just don't like? Time ticked by, and the search for another place dragged on. I got back home and saw Mr. Leatherjacket carrying something in his arms. A large bundle of sheets. Okay, this has gone too far. You can't just burn up that much stuff. I went to try and grab the front door, But I slipped. I don't know what happened. I stumbled, fell, and banged my shin on the staircase leading up to the apartment building. It took me a second to blink away the tears from the pain, but eventually I forced myself through the agony and limped inside. I made a beeline straight for that basement. When I got down there, Mr. Leatherjacket stood there, staring into the furnace, his eyes wide as he breathed deeply. One of his hands was covered in soot. He sniffed hard. He sniffed hard enough to see the soot sticking to his nose. He was inhaling it, breathing it in. "It's beautiful," he whispered, though it was loud enough for me to hear. It was then I noticed Mr. Leatherjacket wasn't wearing his leather jacket. It had been chucked to the side, tossed on the ground next to a box that held an old, worn-looking sneaker. A woman's sneaker. I know because one of my ex's friends had a sneaker very similar to that one. But there was a foot still in the sneaker! I balked in revulsion. I couldn't stop, and I felt the warm, wet fluid of my saliva erupt from my throat and drip through my fingertips. In horror, he was burning someone! He was burning something! He grabbed me. He was bigger than me, and whatever he'd been breathing in had made him completely immune to how strong I was, and how weak he was with all that soot in his body. He cackled. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It gets rid of everything. It'll get rid of anything. I just can't get enough of it," he continued. "It loves me." This guy was tweaking, and tweaking bad. He was freaking me out. I knew that if I didn't get away from him, I was going to be going into that furnace. Maybe Stephen, too. The next part is the most surreal part. But please, I swear to God that this is what happened. Just because you can't feel pain doesn't mean it makes you immovable. I threw what little weight I had and forced him back. His motor responses didn't work properly, and it took him a second to realize he was leaning backwards. He caught himself and stumbled, still holding onto my clothes and me. Then from out of that furnace, from that narrow doorway, I saw something grab him. It grabbed him, pulling him back hard. It was this burnt, charred skeleton, with eyes completely untouched by the flame. Judging, accusing eyes glaring at the side of his head where he couldn't see. He couldn't see what I was seeing. All he felt was these burning, blistering, charred arms curl around his torso and wrench backwards. His spine hit the back of the entrance to the doorway. It hit the lower half, though his legs were still dangling out, but his upper body was pulled inside. I heard him screaming, saw his body twitching, saw him flailing around because whatever had a hold of him was stronger than him, even with all those drugs in his system. I could hear and smell. Oh God, the smell is the worst thing. The fat and the blistering and the pulping, like listening to a steak being cooked, only it's 1,000 times louder and 1,000 times worse. My screaming finally brought someone down to see what had happened. The police were called and I was questioned for hours and hours and hours. His body was unloaded. Crazy thing is that from his waist down was perfectly fine, but the top of him was a charred, blistered skeleton. They didn't understand it, considering the amount of time and heat in that boiler. There's no way he should have been as burned as he was. But it was like he was burned by an inferno. As they were checking his apartment, they found flames drawn up and down the walls. Tattoos of fire that he had printed out and stuck on the walls that he had taken from magazines. I don't know who his victim was, but funny enough, she had a flame tattoo on her ankle. Police reckon that must have been what had attracted him to her. They found soot mixed in with cocaine in his room, and a huge number of tranquilizers. Bottles that he would throw into the fire were still dripping in the small fireplace in his living room. It was an electrical fireplace. How he didn't kill us all, or kill himself, I don't know. Well, either way, he did die. The skeleton remains of his victims were found at the back of the furnace, still there, just in one spot of the furnace that didn't quite reach him. No matter how much coal he put in his beloved fire, it wouldn't hide its crime. I needed to go into therapy after that, and it took me a year or so before I could get my life back on track. I haven't really talked to my ex about the situation. One day I will, but in a weird way, I guess that's karma. I get to see what really happens when you get just too hot-headed.
Obsession can be a dangerous thing, always getting you so hot under the collar. Quite a heated debate in some circles. But it seems as though our caller is just a little bit too cool for that kind of burning desire. I can only hope that such a thing doesn't spark the fear that you, like him, will vanish like a puff of smoke before your eyes. Thank you, caller. Thank you so very much for your call. Obsession can be quite a tricky thing, can it not?
Oh yes. Quite a puzzle why things have to be as such. Why would someone subject themselves to something that so clearly is so dangerous to them?
My word, dear producer, you, of course, are in quite the questioning mood tonight. Clearly this new year is starting off quite well for us. Everyone firing on all cylinders. The ball is rolling, the Spirit Radio is growing, and for all of you out there, I want to very quickly say thank you. Thank you for everything. We couldn't be here without you. And it was only with you that we get stronger still. People find strength in many different things. Isn't that right, caller?
Hey, look at my story, will you? It's about some stuff I did. Not the legal kind. Is that cool with you? I mean, you're not gonna turn me in, right?
I'm not one to judge, I'm not one to preach. All I do is listen. So instead of being a nervous little wreck, why don't you just hold that phone close to that ghastly little mouth of yours and tell your grateful host exactly what happened quickly?
You see, I've never been a nice guy. Not what you'd call a complete jerk, though. I just like to dabble in things I enjoy. Is there any harm in that? Alcohol, sex, drugs, real heediness. That was me. Drugs, man. That was my big go-to. Anything to get that perfect high. That mellow blend, whatever it was. Highs, lows, ups, downs, I've seen them all. I've seen all kinds of trippy things riding out on that chemical euphoria. I've seen dolphins flying through the sky and watched my own skin wave back at me. It was some real trippy stuff, but I loved every second of it. I've had some bad trips too, but that's just a case of rolling the dice. One day, this guy I know, friend of mine, used to shoot up with, told me that he got a real bargain this time. Says that he met this guy, gave him some real grade A stuff. I think, fantastic. Maybe this is going to be the real high. Maybe this is going to be the big A1. I don't know what he fenced to get it. I mean, heck, we're poor as anything, for crying out loud. We couldn't afford it. I was used to seeing different kinds of stuff disappearing out of the house, you know. We're both lodged together, and sometimes I'd fence some stuff out of his. He'd fence some stuff out of mine. Sometimes we'd just downright steal. We had tidy enough jobs. Well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We had jobs as cashiers and stuff. Enough to get us money coming in and not make it look like we were total dope fiends, but we were starting to get pretty desperate, you know. Like that addiction was really kicking. Anyway, he takes out these vials and he's mixing them all up and reading a bit of paper and that this guy had given him. And I'm watching him, nudging him, asking if it's ready yet. I was really getting edgy about it. I needed that hit. I needed that high. He got it all loaded up and ready. Passes me the syringe. There's nothing in that looked like it was going to poison me or anything. You know, if he'd killed me, how was that going to help him? How was he going to pay the rent? Also, he had a freaking dead body on his hands. All that crossed my mind in the space of a second because I was just so desperate for something. That desperation is what led me to this. This feeling. It got me stuck to where I am now. I took it and my God, I could feel everything becoming a kind of numb. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I could feel it pounding and echoing in my skull. Then I felt a ripple of pleasure go right through me. Man, living felt delicious. Just feeling my heart pulsing and it was like being kissed and caressed from my very insides and throughout. I looked at my friend as he grabbed some sort of shot himself. And up as well. I watched as I got that familiar old favorite feeling. That mellow wave getting stronger and stronger, and I was like, oh man, this is gonna be good. And I watched as he split into two dark shadowy figures reaching out to grab at me, licking at the sides of my face and hugging and rubbing against me. It was like the shadows themselves were my own personal harem. With that touch, feeling them, feeling the pleasure of my own heart, it felt like I was floating. Got up and they were clinging to me, hugging to me. I wanted more. I wanted to go somewhere where there would be more. I stepped outside into the darkness. Every step it felt like my feet were bouncing on a trampoline. I felt like I was a giant walking through a house 20 times my own size. I stepped out, and the night just greeted me, lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh, my head was a ping pong table, man, bouncing around all these emotions, and every time light was there, shadow was there being cast, and more shadows would then start grabbing and holding me. Dozens were sitting up, paying attention to me, looking at me, the sky dripping red that would hit the ground and bounce up in a huge splash of crimson that would turn into blossoming trees. People would just slip from the branches and land in each other's arms. It was psychedelic, but so sinister all at once. I mean, this was like trippy how I was seeing the sky bleed and my heart was pounding, throbbing. I was terrified at what I was seeing. At the same time, though, I was enjoying it, and it was the biggest ride of my life. Like a goddamn roller coaster. I was strapped to the front, not on the ride. That'd be too subtle. I was strapped in the front of the whole damn thing. I know it sounds like I was, it was like, I was terrified, but I was so calm. I was seeing all this, and I was so slow to process everything. I was so slow to figure it all out. The fear was making my heart beat faster, and every time the fear would build, that pleasure would build too. That feeling of being alive. I stumbled through the motions, going through the streets and alleyways, and paths that I couldn't possibly have seen, because I was in the middle. Walking down the street and stepping up into a castle like it was from the time of King Arthur. I walked across a bridge made out of marshmallow and blood. But I could see someone. Someone was there. He was she, it, they were waiting. They're waiting for me. As I climbed up a ladder made of clouds, descending downwards into the sky, it was in front of me. I can't describe it because my brain's refusing to remember, but it was a shadow, but it wasn't a shadow. It was in darkness. It was like whatever was there had been erased from my mind. But I remember it pointing at me. "You're new," they said in the most calm, calculated voice. I held out my arms like I was about to hug them and watched as my skin turned into wings. They smiled. "You want to feel even better? You want your life to get better?" I was as high as a kite and swimming in a sea like fish. I was lurching between pleasure and pain and fear and joy, and I say, "Yeah, sure, man. I would love it." I don't even know if I said anything, because every time I spoke, I just saw a cascade of colors spewing from my mouth. This guy snaps their fingers, and then suddenly there's something in front of me. "You just signed this here receipt, and everything's gonna be better for you." I chuckled, I cackled, I howled. I screeched with laughter, and I was like, "Hot damn! I gotta get me more of this," and I signed. I don't know what I signed with. I signed my full name with a pen, a quill, I don't know. I could have written it with my own damn bone at that point. He took that bit of paper, screwed it up, hands it back to me and says, "There's your copy, boy. Gotta keep hold of that, 'cause I'm gonna be holding mine." Suddenly those shadows, they grabbed at me. They reached into my chest and pulled into my heart, and all that pleasure, all of it turned to agonizing pain. I couldn't shake it. I suddenly felt like I was more alive than I'd ever been. Yeah, sure. But I was alive, and I was about to meet my death with this thing looking at me, and those shadows just crawling and pulling at me. It was like they were turning me inside out. I could hear my ribcage starting to grieve. I was screaming in agony. All that pleasure. It was like my skin was being raked over with hot coals and rubbed with sandpaper going straight into the core. My nerves, everything. It lasted for so long. Pain only lasts for so long, but so my brain had like a cutoff feature, you know? When you feel too much, it just shuts off and you black out. But that wasn't happening. That pain wasn't going away. It cluttered me. It felt like it was going up in my throat and into my skull. Suddenly, feeling like I was going to puke, I lunged upwards. There I was. I was sat at the table. There was a cold surrounding me. It made me shiver and shake and tremble. It was adrenaline running through me. Not adrenaline dying out. The feeling of a buzz disappearing. No, nothing like that. Felt like I'd run a marathon. I was running a marathon with something hot up my heels, like flaming coal. I was in the hospital. Some ambulance men, paramedics, they found me stumbling across the street. And, well, they found that I was starting to stop breathing, I guess. I don't know what the word is, starting to shut down, I guess. I couldn't breathe, my heart wasn't responding, I kept convulsing all the time. Yeah, that was the word they were using. They used convulsing. Well, the police had a few questions for me. My friend, the one who got me the stuff, he was dead. He had no answers for me. Said he died of a heart attack, his heart just giving out. Staring up the ceiling like he'd seen. Man, I don't know what he could have seen. If it was strong enough to kill him, and I'd lived through what I've seen, I don't want to imagine what the poor bastard felt. He had the same look of horror on his face, according to the police officer. I was also the suspect of a murder investigation, but the charges were quickly dropped when they realized that it was just one addict who'd gone too far. I couldn't understand what it was, what I'd felt, and what I'd been through. But the scary thing is, when I started to put my clothes back on and leave to the hospital, once they give me the okay, I had a bit of paper with my name at the bottom of it, wrapped up tightly in my coat. And this is the part that's been really scaring me. I haven't used in a long time. Because my life's been getting better. I hadn't needed to use. I haven't felt any withdrawals. I haven't felt anything that would drag me back. I got a job offer. Someone was recruiting and they wanted a driver for a small startup company that's been doing repairs for home computers. They said they could give me all the training I wanted. My own car. Pays phenomenal. It's a better job, better life, and I remember that contract, and I'm sat here thinking about what the heck did I sign to get all of this, and what are they going to get when it's over? I don't know what it is, but just listening to that show now, listening to these broadcasts, I haven't touched anything but once in a while. I see a shadow, a figure, or a person who I think looks at me, but with a smile that's a bit too twisted, and eyes that are a little bit too narrow, grinning back at me. And the absolute scariest part, I saw someone on the train who noticed me looking at them, and they softly whisper, so you can see us now.
Love, obsession, alcohol, and of course, chemical substances all can lead to such surreal, bizarre, and downright outlandish behavior. But sometimes the things that you see while under the influence are there, and you can only see them while under the influence. Dear me, such a vice. But that's the thing about vices. They can clamp themselves tight around you and crush you in their grasp.
I'm afraid, dear host, that that's all the time we have for tonight. You might have to let our dear listeners know something, however.
Yes. Yes, of course. I understand that we had taken somewhat of a hiatus previously, that we had to take a moment to strengthen ourselves and return back to the airwaves. But you don't have to worry, we will be there very shortly with another broadcast for you. After all, now that we're back into the swing of things and the new year has shown us that those pealing bells can't keep us away, it's time for a lot more chills, a lot more stories, and a lot more chances for all of you to be heard. So until then, dear listeners, please remember that nighttime is our time. And maybe next time, when we grace the airwaves, the next tale to be told will be your own. And from me, the producer, ta-ta.